my mouse on all those, and this was the backup because you perhaps didn't see this very well in Miro, and now you didn't even see it when I was talking. So humble apologies for that. I'm not going to go through it again. We haven't got the time. I'd be bored stiff if I did. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is the operational definition. So this is where we actually specify very precisely exactly what it is we are collecting. So another twee example is if you were saying something how to measure the length of a banana, you couldn't just give it a banana and say get on with it. You'd have to say, do you want the inside of a curve? Do you want the outside of a curve? Both, and take the average, or is it all round, or is it, have you only got a straight rule and you have to just measure the distance between the tips and ignore the curve? You know, there's a whole industry in the NHS making data definitions, and you know, they're very important because we've got to make sure we're collecting the same data all the time. If somebody else is collecting the data and picking it up, you need to make sure it's being collected. And even if you're doing it yourself or the same person's doing it, sometimes you forget and it's complicated. So in this, we also need to specify, screen, move on, any exclusions, or yeah, I think we're taking out so here, inclusions and exclusions. So is it, for example, we only want children, or is it only people over 65? Is it males only? Is it people with this condition only, or people who have this intervention? You need to specify that, be very clear about that. And if it's some sort of vagueness about, well, good or bad, or some sort of threshold, again, specify exactly so it is absolutely totally clear what you've got to be. You have to be as detailed as possible. And you will think you've made it as clear as possible and made it obvious. But get that checked out, get somebody else to sort of play it back to you. Somebody, you know, probably is collecting the data, but maybe somebody who isn't too involved in the process, get them to sense check it. Be well worthwhile before you start collecting the data. Just got a bit of lag on the screen now, so there should be some things cropping up. And in a minute, because I've hit it 5 times, it will just flash through all things. Come on. So what this will say in a moment is something along the lines of, it is a secret to getting good data. It's really a bit of a summary of what I'm going to say. So when it comes up, I'm going to flash through it. There we go. Right. Yeah. So I'll just give you a moment to just read things about. I think I've said everything on there. You also might want to think about how you want to split the data. Sometimes it's called grouping. Even stratification. So if you want the data, you want to know the difference between male and females, between different 2 interventions or different age groups or whatever, get that nailed at the start and collect that data. There's no point thinking, oh, it'd be really interesting if we looked at the difference between over 65 and under 65s at the end of it. Just be a right real pain going back and collecting the data. Sometimes the moment might have gone. If it was something you needed to collect from the patient at the time, you might have missed the moment. So be thinking about that right at the outset and then making sure you're capturing it. So for each of our measures now on the screen, we've decided whether it's an outcome or process of balancing. You only really will have one outcome measure, really. Occasionally, you can argue a case for 2. But if you've got lots of outcome measures, really, you've got lots of different aims, really. A few process measures and 1 or 2 balancing. You've got an operational definition for every single one because each one's a different measure, so it'll need a different definition. Next thing we're going to look at is where you're going to get the data from. So when the screen comes up, we'll be saying things like, well, first of all, it might be patient notes. That'd be a good source of data. And then if you move to electronic patient record, it might be a lot easier to retrieve information. That's great. It might be there's an already existing report doing the rounds and you trust. It might be the reason why you've been given this task to improve something because somebody's not too happy with the information on that report and we want you to sort it out. So it could be that that's already in train and you haven't really got much more to do about getting the data. Third option that's going to come on the screen in a minute is getting the information for your IT, business intelligence, information department. I mean, if that information is going on a system somewhere, a database or whatever, the information is definitely retrievable. Don't let anybody tell you it otherwise. It just needs to, obviously, the knowledge, the skills, and the time to do it, which is why you'll need to engage with your informatics friends right at the outset if that's where you're going to go, because they'll have got 27 other things that they need to be doing, and probably the board report that's due by Friday might trump your request for some information. So the sooner you can get that request in, the better. Do that while you're thinking about your project. We'll talk about timing collection of data, but as a heads up, sooner the better you can be getting your data. It's a good thing. Also, if you speak to somebody information who knows how the system works that you're extracting the data from, they might start asking you questions that you haven't thought about. They understand the data quality, the data coverage. They'll probably be saying things like, well, yeah, you might think that information is in the system and used, but we know that people don't put it in properly. It's useless. So at least you know about it, or you could have words with people and start to get them to use that information properly in the system. They might ask you about the exclusions and the groupings that they know is in the system. So it'd be a very useful conversation to have. Here we go. But all those first three fail and you haven't got that information source, you might have to create the dreaded data collection form. But a well-crafted pro forma could be your friend, you know, whilst it might be a bit of a pain filling it in, if you've crafted it well, it will be collecting exact data that you need and give you exactly what you want. You probably have to do something with it afterwards, put it into a spreadsheet or a little database so you can probably analyze it. But it might be just simple hand counting on something, might do the trick. So that might be your last resort, but a common resort. So for each measure, we are going to specify where we're getting the data from. The next thing we need to think about is how often we're going to get the data. So are we doing this in breakout rooms, Simon? Yeah, I think we are. Right, okay. So silly question. When you're in the breakout rooms, can you see my slide still?
No.
Right, okay.
It is on Miro though, so we can give that another try.
Yeah.
Or
jot these down.
jot them down just in case. But I think if we get everyone to open it in Google Chrome, and then hopefully that should work a bit better for when we're sending out into breakout rooms.
Okay. Just 5 minutes, I think, on this one, Simon.
Right, yeah.
So we've got 5 different scenarios. Don't overthink it. Just hit with a couple or 20 little technical problems there. I'm going to rattle through.
Well, I can't hear you.
I could hear you, Paul.
Oh, I can now.
I can hear you, Paul.
Yeah,
okay.
Right.
Okay.
I can hear you. Hope we'll break within 10 minutes. I'm going to just finish this section off and we'll have a break. I'm not going through every one of these. I mean, the number of steps, a lot of people heard one group saying, yeah, daily, that's fine. But there is an issue if you can't count something daily, that say, for example, in this example, your step pattern is totally different Monday to Friday than at the weekend. You'll see a funny pattern. It's a type of cyclical pattern, and you'll know that with lots of things in your work life, that things are different Monday to Friday to weekends, and different days a week have different patterns to each other. So you may want to collect it daily, but you might want to report and aggregate it weekly, because every week's going to have the same number of days in and the same number of weekend days as well. So the general principle there is to learn is that if you collect data at a fine level, you can always add it up. So you can add daily to weekly, you can add daily and make it monthly. But if you collect it the other way around, if you collect data every month, you can't split it back out. Well, you can with a computer system, but if you've aggregated up, it might be hard to split it out. So think about that. The only downside is if you're collecting it at too fine a detail, so it's maybe a bit more labor intensive or whatever, but just bear that in mind. Readmissions, you probably want to wait longer because you need to, it's about two aspects of volume. You might need a certain amount of patients with this condition or whatever to have been through the system before you can really draw conclusions from the data. So you might want to only do about once a month or so. And also you've got to allow time to find out whether a patient has readmitted or not, whether that's like 7, 14, 28 days or whatever. Muscle mass, you might want to leave it a while. It's not going to change that rapidly, but then it's context. Is it somebody who's trying to get buff for the beach, if they be ever allowed to go on holiday again, or is it someone in a frail elderly ward and trying to get them discharged, which probably more frequently want to measure that. And the last two are something that's quite happening very fast. That's the implication there. So if it's something slow and not changing, you might have a longer time period. If it's something fast and rapid, you have a quicker time period, is the overall message there. So for each of our measures, we're going to choose a frequency, which will vary by measure. That's fine. Now we're going to decide who's going to collect the data. Okay. Are you the same person, or are you going to take turns, talk about rotation there, or is it different for each measure? It might be coming in from different places. You need to, as well as thinking about who's going to do it, you need to think, do we need training? Do we need training to get data about system? Do we need training how to do your data collection form? I'm not talking about a day out, it might be 10 or 15 minutes, but get them to tell you that they know exactly what you want to collect. So there's common understanding there. Make sure you've got the time for it. It's not the 27th thing they're going to be having to do this week, because it might be a rushed, botched job, and you don't want that because you can have rubbish data. Get them committed to it as well. This is your chance to show them, to sell them your project. Say, this is really, really important. And the data for this project is fundamental. Without good quality data, no project can demonstrate the change we need to look at. So get them on board with that would be great, but not so on board that they get a little bit too invested in it and they enter a bit of bias. And without wishing to cast any aspersions on anybody's character, that could apply to if you're collecting the data yourself. You know, you're invested in it, and you might, if there's a bit of a grey area whether to include something that's pass or fail or not, you know, you could just fall on one side or the other, which it might come into play if you're feeding something up to your higher echelons of management, and if they're saying, has the information been collected from person who's sort of showing what a great idea it was, or has it come from a more independent source, the trust PAS or whatever, you know? So there might be that just to be aware of at the very least, so you can counter it. So for each of our measures, we've assigned something to collect the data. I've deliberately hidden the last one. We have not got the time now to do these things. So you've been sent the measurements essentials checklist. So on screen, we've sent the guidance. So for each of these areas, we've given a bit of guidance about what should go in there. And then there's a worked example, which I'll rattle through now. Measure name, so just keep it simple, don't get hung up on that. Call it Fred, I don't care. If you want to go sophisticated, having measure numbers, it's helpful. Just say, is it an outcome or process measure? Is it a balancing measure or not? Who's going to make it happen? So this is about lunch on time. So it's a proportion of patients on ward F1 who receive their lunch of choice by 12:30. Very clear, smart. Calculation is the number of patients who receive their lunch on time, that's the numerator, divided by the number of patients on ward F1 at 9 o'clock on the same day. So it's those people who are already in the ward at the morning who can make that decision. People rock up during the morning, we're not bothered about them because they didn't have a chance to choose their lunch. Are there exclusions? Yes. Anybody who's nil by mouth or using a peg feed, we're not including those. Groupings, just to remind you, do we want to do any of those groupings we talked about? Male, female, different age groups, whatever. You've got opportunity to put down your target if you wish, and when you're going to achieve that by. Now we're going to collect the data. So that was planning. We invested a lot of time in planning, quite rightly. Now we're going to collect that data. So on our form, on the second part, we've got some information about what you should be thinking about there. And here, the works example, we've created an audit form. We've allocated the healthcare assistants on duty that day to fill in. And we're going to collect that each day, but we're going to collate it weekly. Baseline data. So the point with baseline data is you need to get that before you change the process. You've got to know what it looked like beforehand. There's no point starting your project and collecting your data at the same time as you're improving things, because how do you know whether its improvements has been made or not if you don't know what it's like before? So you could be you might have historical data, great, or you could start collecting your data while you're setting up your project. You know, while you're doing all that engagement, thinking about how it's going to work, training, whatever you need to do, you could be getting your data then, that's fine. Because your baseline needs to give you a picture of normal. Now, that's going to be a bit of a challenge in 2020 because every data set I've looked at has gone bonkers throughout the year. But, you know, that's a general principle. Ideally, you want 20 data points for your baseline. But that could be 20 days, 20 weeks, 20 months, 20 whatever. It doesn't matter as long as you've got 20 and they're representative and the normal. If you're 12 an absolute minimum, we'll talk about that when we do the charts after a break. But the more the merrier, okay? If you've got 4 years worth of data for something, well, fair play to you, great, as long as there's been no process or system changes during that period. There's no point using 4 years worth of data if 12 months ago you changed your referral criteria or the number of staff you had was different or whatever. It's no longer a picture of normal as it is now, which is why 2020 might be a challenge. But there you go. Astronomical data points. So if you've got very high or very low values in your baseline, you've got to think about whether to include them or not. Be honest yourself. I'll be very high, but that does happen from time to time. Include them. If it's really, really high or low, but that was really weird, you had half the staff off or something happened bizarrely, you might want to exclude that from your baseline because it's not really a fair representation of normal. They are repeating that, can't say that enough. How are you going to get the data? And all the things on the screen now are exactly the same as I've talked through about collecting data. And it's got to be the same because your baseline data and your prospective data has got to be collected exactly the same way. Otherwise, you're not comparing like with like. Occasionally that's a challenge, but really that's the general principle. Right, so this is if you thought up to now was interesting and exciting, this is going to blow your minds. This is the best bit, analysing data. This makes my world move. So there's loads of different ways of analysing data, and we are going to particularly feature SPC charts, and I'll explain in detail what they are. Back to a bit of variation though. If you remember this table here, just to recap, variation for accountability, it often gets adjusted to remove variation. So you can adjusting the trust size, the trust patient profile, acuity or whatever, just so there's a fair comparison, which is fine. Research, you're eliminating variation because you want to compare the effect of a new drug or a new treatment regime. So you need to take every other element of variation out. So you have two exactly matched control trials, control groups. With improvement, we are accepting there is variation, understanding it, and that's absolutely fine. Every process has variation to it. And yeah, move on. So I probably won't have time to share you my data analysis about traveling to work, but for some reason I became obsessed as a worked example, obsessed with my journey to work time. So I've been collecting data on that for over 20 years. And it varies because of weather, time of set off, day of week, and so on. There's lots of things that can affect your journey to time work. And if you're making something like making a screw, and it had to be 2 grams all the time, you know that sometimes it's going to be 2.05 grams and sometimes it's going to be 1.995 grams, and it's probably acceptable. You'd have to set your own thresholds for that. Depends whether you're sort of making a toy or you're making something for the space shuttle or whatever would determine how precise that's going to be. But sure as eggs, every time they made a screw, it's slightly different weight to some degree of precision. I'm not going to get you to do this because we haven't got any time, but if you were to write your signature or letter A out 7 times, it would be fairly similar, but it wouldn't be exactly the same. There would be some variability. And we call that common cause variation as a phrase, or normal variation. It's just part of the process. You know, the way you hold the pen is going to vary slightly, the pressure you apply is going to vary slightly. But if you were to put that into some sort of computer algorithm and say, has this been written by the same person? Is it the same? It would probably say, yes, it is. It's close enough, it's similar. And then I'd ask you to put the pen in the other hand, and you make a write dog's dinner of it. And it looked completely different. And either visually or through a computer algorithm, it'd say, that's not the same, that's different. And in data terms, we call that, you know, special cause variation. And because there is a change in the process. So when we look at the data, we're looking for those changes in the process as an indication that something's changed. Then you need to investigate. Now here, you know what the cause of this, but often in practice, you might not know and you'd have to go and investigate. So that's a visual example of the difference between common cause and special cause variation to get your head around it before we look at the data. And in our working lives and daily lives, you know that the numbers of people attending A&E or time to get to work is not always the same. And again, elements of prophecy from our department. This is a slide from 3 years ago, where we talked about a virus outbreak having a big effect on the A&E attendances. We got one thing wrong though. It seems to have actually totally subdued the attendances at A&E rather than increased them, but there you go. So what I'm going to make this rhetorical. What questions do we want to answer with our data for improvement there's 2 things. We need to understand the variation. Step 1. There is variation. I think we need to understand it, get familiar with it. And then, has there been change over time? And we'll introduce you and explain to you what change really means in this context. Because we can plot the data. So this is now a run chart. As an umbrella term, the umbrella term is control charts. There's loads. There's run charts, SPC chart, funnel plot, QSum, VLADs, also a man of complicated stuff. The run chart is the basic thing. I'll quickly skip through this, but we're going to move on to the next level, which is the SPC chart. But starting with a run chart, it's just simply plotting data over time, which is what the blue diamonds are. And when I say time, we've got over the x-axis, each day of the week, the individual days here, but it could be days, could be weeks, months, even years, as long as these time periods have to be the same. So keep it consistent. Going up the y-axis, we've got a number of something, does not matter. It could be a percentage perhaps, but often a number, you're counting things. And we've got a red line here. Does anybody either in chat box or want to shout out what the red line might be?
We've got a chat box answer of the mean.
Yeah, okay. Close, but not right, I'm afraid.
Median.
Yeah, median, okay. Hold that thought about the mean. For a run chart, it's the median. So that is, if you put all the values in ascending order, from lowest to highest, it's the middle one. And that's the median because it's less affected by high outliers or low outliers. And the blue dots are the values plotted over time. And I'm going to stop with that chart there because what you can do with it is more limited than if we use an SPC chart. So let's get our head around this. There's quite a few similarities. It's data over time. So the x-axis here, we've got months going over time, which is fine. The y-axis is exactly the same. It's just a number of things. So that's fine. The blue diamonds are values of that thing plotted over time. So each diamond represents the number of that thing for that month. They're going up and down because we expect things to change. Okay, so red line here. What's the red line representing this time?
Mean.
Mean, yeah. The mean, so that's what most common parlance is what you think of as the average. So you add up all the values and divide by the number of values. That gives you the mean. So the most common use of the word average. So that's the mean. And you'll notice we have introduced something else. We've introduced the black dotted lines, which are called control limits. So these are mathematically calculated. I haven't got the time to go into that, but they are a product of the values that you've got in here. They're based on the values you've plotted in there, certainly in your baseline. Control the value of the mean and the pun intended, to control the value of the control limits as well. And those control limits are important because they help you to start interpreting the data. And that's why it's in the one advantage over a normal run chart, because you remember run chart didn't have those control limits. And they give you a feel for the range of normality, really. Other things being equal, the probability is most values will fall within the range of those limits. And if they don't, that's starting to make us think about the data. There's loads of different types of SPC charts. Don't worry about it, that's not for today. We're going to look at one chart called an I chart, which is I for individual data items, sometimes called an X chart, mathematical notation, and lowercase x. And don't worry, we are not teaching you how to strip an engine. We're just going to show you how to drive the car a little bit. You don't need to understand the nuts and bolts of it to get out of it what you need. And what you need is to understand, to know and understand how to use the rules, because there's rule sets to interpreting the data, and I'll go through each one of these in turn. There are lots of different rule sets out there. When you start Googling it, looking at books and whatever, there might be different, and the variants to these. So there's no point having an academic debate and arguing a point with people about it all. It's horses courses, what might be right. I mean, you also need to bear in mind these originated in the manufacturing industry and have been adapted for use in healthcare, which isn't exactly the same. So what might be appropriate for manufacturing screws or airplanes might be different for what we're doing with care of patients. We've been adapted and we're using the IHI, the Institute of Healthcare Improvement rule set, which have long been used in healthcare. So, yeah, so we've gone with them and that's good enough really, I think. So, yeah, let's go through each of those rules. So, the first one we're going to look at is something called a shift. So we've had the historical data, we've got our baseline, we've set our mean based on the baseline, we've set our control limits based on the baseline as well, the orange dots here. And by and large, the data, we're going to have half the sample, half the data points going to be above and half are going to be below most of the time. And then suddenly, and so if this first lot of green dots, you imagine there's a load of data to the left-hand side, a history is being built up, suddenly we get 8 data points below the mean. And a bit later on, we've had 8 data points, and this one might look close to the mean, but if you're unsure, you've got the actual raw data to check, you've got 8 data points above the mean. So, what's good or bad will depend on what the data is you're collecting, you know, so it might vary. You will know that. So it's the same rule applies whether it's above or below. But this is very unusual. Something unusual has happened because we haven't got half above and half below. We've suddenly got a loads above or below the line. And if you think about it, think about a 50-50 chance of being above or below. It's like tossing a coin. Half will be heads, half will be tails. And now we've got a run of 8 heads. And if you do maths on that, it's less than 1%, less than 0.5% chance of that happening, 2 to the power 8. So that has not happened by chance, which is what it says at the top, this is unlikely to happen by chance. So something has happened in this process, something has changed. So do you know what? Now, if this has sort of happened fairly soon after you started your improvement project, this might be when you're running down the corridor with arms aloft, celebrating, because this is very good evidence that the change has happened post you improving it. So that's fantastic. If you don't know what has caused it, you need to jolly well go and find out. If it's your data, go and find out, ask some questions. If you don't know, you might know, oh, that's the time when we lost the staff, or that's the time when we suddenly noticed loads of referrals coming in or whatever. If you're being shown this data by somebody who reports to you, you want an explanation. If you're setting up the management tree, should have an answer ready, because you should be expecting to be asked that question. What has caused this? And that's the key theme throughout all the slides now. Understand the root cause of this. So the next rule you're looking out for in the data is something called a trend. And a trend is when you have, for a starting point, going up 6 consecutive data points, they increase one after the other. Or, as at the right of this chart, they decrease one after the other. Now, this might be seen when something is a bit more slowly being rolled out across the teams or the hospital, or just something takes a while to get embedded. You know, you've still got a bit of the old process going on. New referral criteria is taking a while to filter through to the system. So something's cumulatively slowly getting through to the data. Whereas the previous one is a bit more of a step change. From this time, something dramatically happened differently. Here we haven't. The third rule you're looking for is something called an astronomical data point. And this is where the control limits are really useful for this. A run chart is a bit of a judgment call, but with an SPC chart, you've got a clear rule. Is it above or below the control limit? And if it is, it's called an astronomical data point, and it needs investigating. What has caused that? Now, if this process isn't the most important thing going on in your world, and it's a one-off, then you know how much time you can invest to investigate it is a management call, really. But if it keeps happening, or it's a very important critical process, then obviously you do need to understand what has caused it. The fourth one is a bit more complicated. It's called the outer thirds rule. And what we've done here, they're fairly faint, but we split the zone between the central line, the mean, and the outer limit into 3. And we're looking at this outer third element of that split of 3, both at the top and at the bottom. And if you have any 2 out of 3 data points falling in there, then that is special cause variation. So in the first instance, we've got one at the top. There's a point that's appeared in the middle, and then one at the bottom. So out of those 3, we've got 2 of them are in the outer thirds. Also, I think the fact that it's swung from the upper third to the lower third is showing a fair degree of volatility. So that's almost an extra little warning flag. So that's special cause variation. That statistically doesn't happen by chance. And then over to the right, we've got 2 next to each other that have happened, and they're in the same zone, we're in the lower outer third. And it's two together, it's 2 out of 3. You'd be looking at this data over time. So you'd put that point in, and then you got 1, 2. So out of those 3, you've still got 2 out of 3. After outer thirds, we have, funnily enough, inner thirds. So this is when, if you put the third lines in the middle, so they're now bounding the central mean line. So we've got this zone here, is the inner thirds, and every data point, 15 consecutively, have fallen now within that inner thirds. And this is pretty unusual to see. In real data I see, I've actually never seen this happen. It's very rare. And it's probably, you might feel it's quite a good thing, because if you've got these control limits being built up based on a history of a certain amount of volatility that have put the control limits at these places we can see on the screen. And suddenly the data has become much less volatile, which is probably a good thing for most processes. And it's much more centered around the mean. But that hasn't happened by chance. Something has intervened in that process. Something has changed. So investigate, find out what it is. Which is the message on the screen now, investigate. There's only there's five main ones, I suppose. I mean, you can, if you start reading about it in detail, but you can find loads and loads of more rules. It's more prosaic. The first three, the shift is the most common, shift and astronomical most common, trend does happen, outer thirds can happen. And you can have more than one happening either at the same time or as a precursor to something else happening. I should say on the consecutively increasing or decreasing, it doesn't matter whether or not it crosses the mean. It could be that they're all above the mean and they're on the way. The shift is happening on its way. Sorry, the trend is happening on its way to a mean shift happening. Or indeed, as part of that, astronomical data point happens as well. You can have a combination happening. It doesn't really change the picture for you or what you need to do. You still need to investigate, and having 2 or 3 red flags alerted doesn't really change that. No one is better than the others. They're just all saying special cause is happening. Go and investigate. Yes, Lauren?
Do you know when you've maybe identified a shift, are you supposed to then recalculate the median?
Potentially, maybe. I hope we've got a slide. I've got time for a slide on that, which I'll talk in detail. If you see special cause, you investigate and can understand the reason and feel that is going to be sustained, then probably yes. You're now in a sort of new era, so you want to compare your prospective data with that new era.
Yeah. So for instance,
it is often used. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, so we've been doing red to green, and we've been sort of tracking sort of length of stay. So we've identified sort of shifts, various sort of shifts on the different wards. So then we were thinking, right, we recalculate now, so that we then start comparing against that new, like you say, the new normal, as it were. You know, we've kind of made an improvement. After you find a shift, is that a reason to kind of celebrate an improvement in a way, because something has happened significant?
Yeah, if it's a positive shift, and you do understand the reasons because it's part of the improvement project, then I think it is. And you often see it as part of people's poster displays and whatever. People have show about step change at some point after their thing, and it is, it's good news story and something to share, that sort of thing, and then measure against that new normal because you want to sustain it. And if you just kept it the same, you'd just be showing that's all continuous position from time gone by. Well, you've moved on. So, and can we either improve from that if that's possible, or at the very least sustain that new level? Yeah, thank you. Timing wise, so I'm hoping you now all understand that. We're going to give you a little practice. I think I'll try and keep this just short, because if people are encountering technological issues and you can't get involved, then it's a bit frustrating. So there are 10 examples, and what we're going to ask you to do is we'll put the rules at the top of each board as a reminder, so you haven't got to memorize those today. Memorize them for another time. And we've got different charts on there. There's 10, but we're not going to give you enough time to do all of them. And then you can grab sticky notes or write, just chat about them, and say what, and are you seeing any special cause variation? What type of variation is it? Which of those rules, and where? And to chat amongst them, see which ones you can get through if in time. I'm thinking just to 10 minutes, Simon, which is not enough time to do more. Have a go at first couple, maybe try number 8. Okay, Okay, I'm going to hand over to Simon to sort of get us going. And if you've got any questions about the whole process, do shout out. Okay, so normally I try and make this quite interactive and get people to say what they see. I think in the interest of time, I'm just going to rattle through slides. So hopefully you all got a chance to see something about and discuss some of them. So chart 1 was a shift, got 8 points below the mean. And this one, you know, depends on what sort of graphics you're using, what's the icon size in Excel. It might be a bit difficult to tell, but that's why if you're unsure visually, just look at the actual source data and then you can check it out. Chart 2 was a trend, a decreasing trend. So after this data point, we had 6 going down, one after the other, getting ever smaller. Again, this value looks similar to that, so you have to check raw data. I mean, as we'll introduce well, you actually got sent our template, our chart maker tool. It'll do that for you, but if you just want to check the raw data, if you need to. Chart 3 was fairly standout. Got an astronomical data point down below the lower control limit. Chart 4, we need to put the lower thirds limit on that. It's a bit tricky without that sometimes. So I've added that in there. And now we've got 2 out of 3 in the lower thirds in the middle of that chart. Chart 5, a bit of a standout one. And then again, we've got middle thirds, inner thirds. Suddenly that data from its history, creating control limits at this level, has suddenly condensed and gone down into middle. So that's something's happened there. Chart 6, some people, groups I were in, were spotted there was 2. There's a shift at the end and a shift at the beginning. Now, the beginning one, if this is part of your baseline data collection, when you're collecting the baseline data, you're just trying to get a picture of normal. You're not really looking for special cause rules at this stage. But if there was a history going back many data points, many months before this, then yeah, of course it is a shift. Chart 7, again, there's 2 here. We've got the trend at the end and it crosses through the mean line. That doesn't matter, that's not significant. And we've got an astronomical data point at the beginning. Again, if that's part of your baseline, I'm not that fussed about it. It's just collecting the picture of normal. But if there's a history before we've got to this point, then of course it's astronomical and needs investigating. Number 8, did anybody spot anything for number 8? If you got that far. This is normally where I get things thrown at me or whatever. People get a bit annoyed because there is actually nothing to be seen here. Literally, it is just an example of normal variation. There are no rules being invoked at all. People sort of almost will and desperate to see it, especially if I've spent the previous 20 minutes explaining the rules and ramming them home, you know, and telling you to look for rules, which you do need to, but it's no surprise. It's called normal variation because that's what normally happens, you know, clues in the title. And this is what most of the data you will look at will show. And that's fine. That's to be expected, absolutely. And this is when, as a manager or whatever, you need to hold your nerve. If things are going up and they shouldn't be, well, that's just how this process is. It sometimes does go up. And if it's going down and you think, yeah, great, we've nailed this. No, you haven't. It's just normal variation for this process. Wait until one of those rules have been invoked before you start raising the flags. And, you know, things you'll know about seasonality, you know, mortality rates go up in winter anyway because of respiratory diseases, normal pattern. So, you know, and mortality rates for hospitals are down in the summer. So don't be sort of patting yourselves on the back if you've got showing mortality rates low in the summer. Well, just know that's how this system works anyway. So be aware of the subtleties of your service. If service delivery is different on a Monday to a Friday, be aware of that change. So chart 9, there was a shift at the end and an outer third here would have been a bit hard to spot. It may not got onto number 9, but both one was a high and one was low in my illustration, and that's to be looked out for. Again, that wouldn't be happening by normal variation. And chart 10, we had two trends. There was one in the middle and one at the beginning.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that's sort of reasonably clear. I've lost the chat box. So any questions, Simon, I think?
No, we haven't got any questions in the chat box, but Lauren has got a hand up. So do feel free, Lauren.
Yeah, I just wondered if you could go back to the trend slide.
This one?
No, I think it was number 2.
Ooh.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So here, I was just wondering, so say you did something and you notice a trend and you go, yay, something great's happened. And then obviously, then something happens in July and September whereby it, whatever it may be, you know, say it was number of complaints, yeah, they've decreased. And then suddenly they've gone back up in July onwards. Would you then start looking at what's happened in sort of July, September as to why it wasn't sustained?
Yeah. Back to rebasing, what you might have done after that trend, and you've investigated, understand the reason, believed it to be sustainable, you might have reset the limits at the end of that trend. Sorry, from the beginning. It's a bit of a funny one with a trend. The shift is a bit easier, but you reset the control limits, and then you'd have a new mean and a new level, and you might start seeing that this data on the right-hand side is actually becomes a shift from that new. So you might have another special cause variation.
Yeah.
So yeah, things have, whilst you have seen a nice improvement, let's say here, things have sort of gone back awry and gone back to the previous normal here. So it hasn't been sustained. So this might be a case where actually, in reality, we're right not to reset the control limits. It wasn't a sustainable, might have been known about, but it wasn't sustainable. So things were looking good, but then they've gone back to how they were before.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you.
Okie doke. Now we have no way got a chance to do this exercise. So, but you've been sent the template, and what we've put in there was the baseline data of 14 days. And there was a scenario we were walking through, and then we're going to add the other bits of data in. But if you want to do that in your leisure, just add the data in the chunks. But I think the data's in the spreadsheet. If not, we can send it out. So what was going to happen, basically, when you plot the data in the chart, your baseline looks like that. Then we put in period 1, this day 15 to day 24 data in, having made a change, but the change didn't really affect anything. We still saw normal variation. So we had another period, days 25 to 34, where we affected another change. We tried another change idea, and lo and behold, we saw a shift. So we saw shift, we saw out of thirds, we saw an astronomical data point. So this change that clearly made the desired improvement here. So that's good. And whilst we would rebase, and in the tool there's a column where you can put yes rebase from a certain point, and it recalculates the control limits going forward for you. It's going to be quick fire now. Cyclical patterns, look out for them. The rules can't really build that in. You need to know the process, you need to understand it and look out for them. They will not be as clear and obvious as this, so you have to use your brain for it. I talked about mortality. This, for example, is showing quite a common, if you're plotting data Monday to Friday, we've got 5 data points here and suddenly drop for 2, Saturday, Sunday, 5 data points, drop 2. Blah, blah. It could be that example of delivering lunch on time. Monday to Friday, we're doing quite well. Saturday and Sunday, the wheel falls off the catering trolley and the process doesn't work as well. Now, things might be different Saturday and Sunday for operational reasons, and it's not outside your control, and that's just how it is, and that may be what you want to live with. In which case, you might want to strip out Saturday and Sunday data from this and just plot weekdays data over time, because that's what you're really looking at. And you might have a separate chart for weekends, and it could be a different split from weekends to weekdays, but you know what I mean. If, however, that's not acceptable, you're offering a 7-day service or 24/7 service or whatever, and if you're a patient, it doesn't make any difference to you whether it's Saturday or Sunday or Monday or Friday. This highlights a point and actually gives you an idea of where you need to focus, but you really want to start making the change. You might want to focus on the weekend. So leave that data in. Don't sweep it under the carpet. Don't just remove it because it's inconvenient. Keep it in. So keep your eyes out for any sort of cyclical patterns. I think, what time are we on? 53. I'm going to have to, you're going to see very quickly my story about me going to work, but I'm going to have to skip through that. I'm going to take you through this slide, which has been asked a couple of times about, when do I reset control limits? So the first thing is, are you just monitoring the situation, or are you actually actively working on an improvement project? So if you're just monitoring a situation, I mean, they're fairly similar, but if you're just seeing common cause variation, just allow those control limits to flow. They'll change with the data going forward. If you see special cause variation, you investigated, you understand the reasons, you believe it's going to be sustained, reset from the start of that variation. So you have got a new normal. If you see astronomical data point, allow to float if isolated cases. If you're working on an improvement project, what we say is, when you've got your baseline data, fix and extend the control limits. It's a good way of demonstrating that, other things being equal, your future state is going to sit within those control limits. And with that mean, that's how the baseline was a good picture of normal. So other things being equal, we're going to stay like that. So fix that. And our tool does do that for you. If you see common cause variation, just keep those original fixed control limits. That's what you're measuring yourself against, the process against, was that original baseline. And if you see special cause variation, consider resetting the control limits and the mean from the start of that variation. So it's not too dissimilar to the monitor situation, but it's more laser focused on an improvement scenario. Any questions on that slide?
No questions have popped up in the chat box about that slide, but have responded to a question in the chat box myself, so feel free to continue, Paul.
Okay, I know it takes a little while to type things sometimes. Okay, we talked about that. Probably last slide, I think I can cover off. In terms of decision making, bear with me, I've tried to visualize another way of thinking how you can use these charts to decide what you need to do. First of all, 2 types of variation. We've got common cause and special cause, as you now know. So which are we seeing? We're going to go down the common cause variation side first of all. Is the scope for improvement in this process? Well, first of all, say none or little. You could argue, well, we can always improve things, but when I say little, it's performing at a level we're totally acceptable. We've got 100 other things that are more important. Concentrate on them. So leave it, no further action. Just keep monitoring it. We're happy. It's common cause variation. Performing at a level where leave it be. Work on something else. If there is scope for improvement, so we're not operating at a level we're happy with, this is when we review and redesign the process. And I'll come back to this box in a moment, because this is almost like, this is the thing. This is the point where we're changing things. For a moment, let's go down the right-hand side. If we're seeing special cause variation, first of all, again, it's a scope for improvement. If there's none or little, you might investigate, or you might take no further investigation, because it's special cause variation. It's out of control. It's not stable, but it's performing at an okay level. We're happy, other things to deal with. So investigate if you want, or leave it. If there is scope for improvement, you need to investigate and address. That was like the key message from those slides about seeing special cause. Investigate and sort it out. If it's not performing at a level you're happy with, sort it out. And then you go back through the loop, decision loop type of variation. And you're on the right-hand side. If you keep seeing special cause variation, it's out of control. You've got to get this process stable and in control before you can move down the left-hand side. And the left-hand side is your golden thread, really. Your left-hand side is, if you've got common cause variation only, so it's stable, your scope for improvement, you want to improve it, then that's when you review, redesign the process and implement the change. In that's the scenario. I think, I can't really talk about, when you get slide decks, there's a bit about qualitative data. I want to sort of wrap up there. We've got a short questionnaire to send, put in the chat box. If you could do it sort of nowish while it's fresh, that'd be great. Doing about five questions and a bit of free text if you want to add anything in. The slides, you've also already got our template. There's other resources on our website, so you've got the links for that as well. Obviously, Google will take you there, but it's there for you as well, and in the slides. You've got our contact details there if you're quick before I go off the slide, or if you want to, when you get the slide deck, if you've got any questions afterwards, that's fine. I'm going to stop sharing. Simon, you're going to put that link for evaluation in the chat?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I've just popped the evaluation in the chat box. If you could fill that out for us. Obviously, we are an improvement organisation. We do like to try and make sure that we can make improvements where possible. So we do value your feedback. Lauren, have you got a question? Would you like to unmute yourself?
All the patients had, similar-ish sort of length of stay so far, roughly within a few sort of months or so. But say, for instance, there's one patient who's been there for, 200 days, which is completely going to skew your data. Would you keep that person in, and then when they're finally discharged, it will bring your average right down, or do you just remove that patient because it's so different than the rest of the data points?
Well, you've raised two questions in my head. First of all, sounds like you're calculating people's lengths of stay whilst they're still in and building up, which is normal to calculate lengths of stay after the facts known what their length after they're discharged.
Yeah, so it's on discharge patients. So
yeah, okay. So yeah, this often happens. You actually know, and you know this is going to happen. You've had somebody in for a long time, and then suddenly it's going to mess your data up because suddenly you can have a long stay at discharged. Well, see, I'm talking about including and excluding was for your baseline period, but I'm thinking you've had your baseline period, you've got your position of normal. Yeah. So this is cropped up, right? So you've got, you have an astronomical data point. I would not exclude it. It should stay in. It is a statement of what's happened. So you can't just arbitrarily remove data points because you don't like them. I mean, the example a reasonable reason for removing them might be if the data is absolutely wrong. The computer said no, it's giving you no figures, and it's not a zero, it's just gone wrong, or something in the maths, or something's really changed it, then you could possibly not include it. But I'll throw it in. It'll be an astronomical data point, but you've got an explanation. Hopefully you understand the story about that individual patient and you know why. So it's understandable and explainable.
Yeah, that's fine. So we'll just because obviously the average will go down a lot. So, is it a success of the program, or is it just because that person has gone and just brought it right down?
The average, if you fix the average after your baseline, the average isn't changing. The average is fixed from the original point. So this one data point won't change your average.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So it shouldn't impact. Yeah. No, that's great.
Okay. Cheers.
Thank you.
Jackie, do you need to do any wrapping up and stuff?
Well, we have gone past 12, I'm afraid. But thank you very much for your participation today. I'm glad that I think it's been a whistle-stop tour. So Paul and Simon, just thank you very much for your time and for all your support. Really, I'm thinking in my head, we could do with another session on this at some stage. I don't know how people feel, but do give us your feedback and then we can have a look at that. But thanks very much. The next event is on the 3rd of Feb and it's covering personalised care, and Pam will send the link out with the slides, but also you can get the information on MIA's website. Pam, do you want to add anything to that?
So there's an event section on MIA's website at the top if you navigate from there, but I will send the link out. This is a series of events, so I can also send the link if you missed our first event on measure. And then also we've got a final event on the 3rd of March, which is developing a culture of quality improvement. So I'll bundle all that up together in a package for you so you can catch up on the whole series of events.
Okay, everybody, thank you very much. And thank you to Paul and Simon again. It's been a great morning. Thanks for your time. Bye.
Thank you.
Right, you're welcome. Thanks for your involvement, everybody.